Hello, people! Today we will be talking about the enemy of maps, the minority hunter, the one and only alcoholic swordsman, Roronoa Zoro. Eh, Probably not a good start for topic we're covering, but man, it's One Piece. What can you do? Well, since you clicked on the video, you already know who Zoro is. And if you don't and aren't caught up to at least the first half of Elbaf, then be warned, this is gonna be full of spoilers. Here, we're gonna cover Zoro through Act 1 and 2 of One Piece. Zoro is the first to be recruited. When we meet him, we learn that he is a swordsman, and his dream is to become the greatest swordsman in the world, which is a pretty lofty goal by and of itself, but it is not until we get to his backstory that we understand the depth of his dream. Kid Zoro wants to be the greatest swordsman, but he has a rival in Kuina, who he battles with every day in order to improve and beat her. But he has not won yet. 2000 times they have fought, and 2000 times Zoro has lost. In frustration and dedication to prove himself, to defeat her, he challenges her to a battle with real swords. They fight, and he loses again. His 2001st loss. He cries from frustration, and she cries too. She tells him that as a girl, she will soon start to lose her strength, and even though she wants to be the greatest swordsman too, her father says that girls will never be able to achieve that. Hearing that, Zoro loses it. He has been doing his hardest to grow stronger, doing all sorts of training so that he can beat Kuina. To hear from her that he will achieve that not because his hard work paid off, not because he beat her in a duel, but because it's default due to genetics. Zoro tells her that it is an insult to his dedication, to all the work he put in. Zoro refuses that way of thinking, and they both promise each other that one of them will become the greatest swordsman in the world. And then Kuina dies, without warning, without any chance to change the outcome. They had just made a promise, and now suddenly he is left to fulfill it alone. In her death, he takes her sword, the Wado Ichimonji, and makes another promise that he will become the greatest swordsman in the world and make his name reach the heavens, reach her. From here, Zoro's grief starts. He has just experienced a heavy loss. He needs to grieve and heal and move on. Not saying he needs to forget about the promise, but he definitely needs to grieve and process the loss so that he can move on from that and be healthy mentally. When a child experiences trauma of any kind, it is the responsibility of the adults around them to help them work through it, as children do not yet have the frame of reference on how to deal with such situations themselves. People can say that children are resilient as an excuse to justify neglecting their mental health, but that is wrong. What the mind of the child does is that it starts doing damage control, focusing on just surviving right now, in the moment. They develop coping mechanisms, oftentimes unhealthy ones, mainly because they don't have the experience yet to decipher what is healthy and what is unhealthy yet. And because the priority is survival and not mental health, they often tend to employ unhealthy coping mechanisms. Now, I do not have in depth knowledge about Bushido and Samurai code, so what I'll be talking about is limited to Wikipedia search and what I can observe in Zoro's behavior. Zoro's teacher, Koshiro, is a traditional and patriarchy abiding man who upholds the harmful things taught by that ideology, mainly in this instance about how men should grieve. The Bushido code that he follows and teaches his disciples puts heavy emphasis on approaching grief with a focus on acceptance of death, honor, and duty. However, this often went hand in hand with restraining their emotions and not letting heavy emotions out in public. It's an exhausting thing to unhealthily carry grief. But it is what he teaches, and it is what Zoro follows. Zoro carries the symbol of it with him, the water Ichimonji. However, once we're introduced to him, there is another thing that goes hand in hand with him throughout Act 1 and 2. His wounds. The wounds on his body are, I think, the physical representation of his mind needing to heal, something that he keeps delaying. From the moment we met him in Shellstown, he is wounded. He is tied up in the marine yard, starving and roughed up, and he goes into the fight with Morgan, starving and hurt too. Then, in Orangetown, he is injured by Kabachi and also injures himself. Then again, he gets hurt fighting the Meowtooth brothers in the Syrup Village arc. At Baratie, he fights Mihawk and almost dies. He realizes just how far his dream is, and he makes another promise with the Wado Ichimonji pointing towards the sky, to himself and Luffy that he will become the greatest swordsman in the world as the Pirate King deserves no less on the crew. And after getting up from that, he immediately heads off to Kokoyashi village with Usopp, Johnny, and Yosuke with minimal bandaging and still being severely injured. He goes into that fight on the brink of death and worsens his barely healing wounds. Then, in Little Garden, he cuts off his leg halfway. In Drum Island, he almost froze to death because he could not stop training for even a moment. Then in Alabasta, he almost dies again, and instead of resting and letting his body heal, he goes right back into training. In Mocktown, he lets Bellamy beat him. In Skypiea, he gets electrocuted a few times. Long Land again gets hurt during the ball round with Sanji. And further from that, he has to retreat from the fight with Aokiji on Luffy's orders. Water 7 gets both the emotional damage from Usopp living and the physical damage from fighting Lucci and Kaku. In his lobby, he fights with a major handicap, Thrillbug, and Thrillbug, well, do I even gotta say? In Sabaody, he takes his body, which is barely holding itself together, and fights Kuma and Kizaru and collapses. After he gets sent away to Mihawk's Island, he fights the gorillas while still being injured from Thrillbark and Sabaody. And after numerous failed attempts at getting back, he learns from Mihawk that Ace died right in front of Luffy and gets the biggest wound of Act 1. And so we can see that throughout the pre-time skip, every arc, Zoro either gets into a fight already injured or he gets injured during that fight. Oftentimes, both happens. And on the rare occasion that neither occurs, he has to fight with a handicap. Now, to a lot of the fan base, this seems cool and shows just how badass Zoro is. But to me, it just shows a person trying to shoulder everything on their own and absolutely wrecking their mind and body in the process. Chopper, every time Zoro gets injured, stresses the importance of resting and letting the body heal, but Zoro goes right back into training anyway. This is depicted as a gag, and while it is funny, it is also deep in the sense that it shows Zoro's anxiety in wanting to get stronger and disregarding his health in order to do so without force feeding this message to us. We can see bits of it when Zoro, after losing to Mihawk at the Baratie, starts to train constantly. If he is not drinking or sleeping or fighting, then he's training. When people are avoiding dealing with grief, they typically develop other coping mechanisms which can keep them distracted so they don't have to focus on their grief. One such coping mechanism is obsessing over something. In Zoro's case, his obsession is training and getting stronger, and his dream and stubbornness only helps disguise it better. After Marineford, when he gets to know about Luffy, his anxiety, his obsession only multiplies. Now, after the timescape, the Straw Hats are stronger than ever before, so Oda can't use the same method of Zoro getting injured every arc anymore. Doing that would take away from the effort all of them put in these 2 years, and then what would be the point in waiting and getting stronger if Zoro would just get injured again every arc? So, what I think he did is that he replaced the constant wounds by giving Zoro a permanent scar, the scar on his left eye, the scar which is now the representation of him disregarding his body and mind in order to keep going and improving. Post timeskip, Zoro is constantly training, but because the opponents he faces until Wano aren't up to match, we don't see just how much his obsession has increased. But Oda does let little tidbits shine through in other ways. These come in the form of whenever Zoro tells Luffy to take things seriously, for example, Punk Hazard, or when he lashes out, for example, at Zo when he learns about what happened with Sanji. In Wano, when he faces tougher opponents, we can see his anxiety. When he takes hit after hit in fights and takes the medicine that would give him twice as much pain and damage later, so he can keep going for now and fight King now. With Wano ends the Act 2 of One Piece, and even in Act 3, we can see little pieces of Zoro's anxiety increasing. For example, when he reprimands Luffy for feeling sad after he realizes that Vegapunk is dead. Furthermore, he is also a bit too paranoid in Elbaf, shown in the way he doubts Luffy's intuition of Loki and how he treats Loki. As I said before, Zoro's wounds represent him needing to let his mind heal. He needs to grieve so that he can properly process the loss and move on. It is only after he does this will he be able to deal with his obsession and anxiety and be on a healthy path towards achieving this dream. This is the end of this video. Thank you for watching. Till next time.